3 days after their son Tommy vanished into the forest, Sarah and Michael began noticing a bobcat tapping purposefully on their living room window as if trying to communicate. It wasn't aggressive. It was waiting. The bobcat waited until it had their attention, then walked toward the forest, pausing to look back as if it expecting them to follow it and go with it. Desperate for answers, they decided to follow it. The bobcat led them on an hour-long trek deep into the woods to an uncharted wilderness they'd never seen before. They thought they were chasing a last, fragile chance to find their son. But what they found wasn't just a clue about their son. They were about to reveal a secret that had been buried for half a century. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun streamed through the tall pines of Redwood Falls, Oregon, casting long shadows across the Mitchell family's kitchen table. Sarah Mitchell absently stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against ceramic in a rhythm that had become her only constant these past 3 days. Across from her, Michael gripped his own mug with white knuckles, the dark circles under his eyes matching her own. The search team called off the helicopters, Michael said quietly, his voice hoarse from calling Tommy's name through the forest until his throat was raw. They're scaling back tomorrow. Sarah's hand stilled. At 38, she'd thought she understood fear. The terror of her difficult pregnancy with Tommy, the panic when he'd fallen from his bike at age 4, the dread of Michael's cancer scare 2 years ago. But nothing compared to this hollow, consuming anguish of not knowing where their 7-year-old son was. "They can't give up," she whispered. "He's out there. I know he is." 3 days ago, Tommy had been playing in their backyard, which bordered the vast wilderness of the Cascade Range. Sarah had been inside for just 10 minutes. 10 minutes to take a work call she now wished she'd never answered. When she'd returned to the yard, Tommy's basketball sat abandoned near the garden gate, which stood open like an accusation. His small footprints led into the forest before disappearing among the pine needles and undergrowth. The entire town of Redwood Falls had mobilized. Search parties combed every trail, every ravine, every creek bed. Dogs tracked his scent for 2 miles before losing it near Miller's Creek. The sheriff brought in experts from Portland. The local news ran Tommy's school photo, gap-toothed smile, auburn hair like Sarah's, Michael's earnest green eyes, every hour. But the forest kept its secrets. A sharp tap at the living room window made both parents jump. Sarah rushed to investigate, expecting perhaps a neighbor with news, but found only the empty porch. She was about to turn away when movement caught her eye. There, sitting perfectly still on the porch railing, was a bobcat. Sarah's breath caught. In 15 years of living at the forest's edge, they'd seen bobcats maybe twice, always at a distance, always fleeting. This one sat barely 3 feet away, separated only by glass. Its tawny coat was marked with dark spots, its ear tufts prominent, and its eyes. Those eyes held an intelligence that made her skin prickle. "Michael," she called softly. "Come here," slowly. Her husband appeared at her shoulder, inhaling sharply. "Is it rabid? Should I call animal control?" But even as he spoke, they both knew something was different about this encounter. The bobcat wasn't behaving aggressively or erratically. It sat with an almost regal bearing, watching them with those penetrating yellow eyes. Then, deliberately, it raised one paw and tapped the window again. Tap, tap, tap. "It's knocking?" Michael breathed. The bobcat held their gaze for another long moment, then dropped from the railing and padded across the porch. At the steps, it paused, looking back at them over its shoulder in what seemed unmistakably like an invitation. Then it vanished into the tree line. Sarah and Michael stood frozen, trying to process what they'd witnessed. "That wasn't normal," Sarah finally said. "Nothing about these past 3 days has been normal," Michael replied. "Do you think... could it know something about Tommy?" It sounded absurd spoken aloud, yet they'd both felt it, that strange sense of purpose in the animal's behavior. The next morning, as Sarah sat by the window nursing her 4th cup of coffee and watching the search teams gather in their driveway, the Bobcat returned. This time, she was ready, grabbing her phone to record as it approached the window with that same deliberate gait. Again, it tapped 3 times. Again, it waited until it had their attention before walking toward the forest, pausing to look back. "We should follow it," Sarah said. Michael shook his head. "Sarah, honey, I know we're desperate, but..." "But what? The search teams have found nothing. The dogs have found nothing. This Bobcat shows up the day after Tommy disappears and acts like nothing I've ever seen from a wild animal. What if it's trying to tell us something? Animals don't..." "I don't care what animals don't do." Sarah's voice cracked. "Our son is missing, and I'll follow a dancing elephant if it might lead me to him." The Bobcat returned again that afternoon. This time, Sarah was already dressed in her hiking boots and jacket. Michael, unable to let her go alone despite his skepticism, pulled on his own gear. "If it runs or acts aggressive, we come straight back," he said. Sarah nodded, her hand on the door handle. Agreed. They stepped onto the porch slowly. The Bobcat, rather than fleeing, simply watched them with those unsettling eyes. When they descended the steps, it began walking into the forest, maintaining a steady pace about 20 feet ahead. Every so often, it would pause and look back, as if ensuring they were still following. They walked for nearly an hour, far off any trail Sarah recognized. The Bobcat led them through a grove of ancient Douglas firs, across a small creek she didn't know existed, and up a steep hillside covered in ferns. Michael marked trees with bright orange surveyor's tape from his emergency kit, creating a trail back. "Sarah," he panted, "this is crazy. We should go back, tell the search teams about this area." But Sarah pressed on, drawn by a mixture of desperation and an inexplicable certainty that this meant something. The Bobcat continued its steady pace, never too fast, never too slow, like a guide who knew exactly where it was going. Finally, after another 30 minutes of hiking, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a cabin, or what remained of one. The structure was clearly old, its wood weathered to silver gray, roof partially collapsed, windows dark and empty. Vines had claimed one entire wall, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. The Bobcat sat at the cabin's threshold, looking at them expectantly. Sarah's heart hammered as she approached. The door creaked open at her touch, revealing a dim interior thick with dust and shadows. Pale afternoon light filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating furniture covered in decades of grime. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace filled with old leaves. "Tommy?" she called, her voice echoing in the empty space. "Tommy, are you here?" No answer. But as her eyes adjusted, she spotted something that made her gasp. There, on the dusty floorboards near the fireplace, was a small red knit cap. Tommy's favorite, the one Sarah's mother had made for him last Christmas. She snatched it up, pressing it to her face, inhaling desperately for her son's scent. "He was here," she whispered. Michael. He was here. Michael was examining the walls where old photographs hung in rotting frames. One caught his attention, and he carefully lifted it from its nail. Wiping away the grime with his sleeve, he stared at the image. A black and white photograph of a man standing in front of this very cabin when it was new. The man wore a formal suit typical of the 1940s, and his face. "Sarah," Michael said slowly, "you need to see this." Sarah looked at the photograph and felt the blood drain from her face. The man in the picture could have been her brother, her father, her grandfather. The resemblance was beyond uncanny. The same angular jaw, the same deep-set eyes, even the same slight crook in the nose that she'd inherited from her mother's side of the family. "Who is this?" she breathed. They searched the cabin more thoroughly but found little else. Some rotting books, rusted tools, a few more photographs too damaged to make out the Bobcat had disappeared, leaving them alone with their discovery and more questions than answers. They hurried back, following Michael's orange tape, and went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wade Patterson, a steady man who'd been leading the search efforts, listened to their story with professional patience that barely masked his skepticism. "A Bobcat led you there," he repeated flatly. "I know how it sounds," Michael said, "but Tommy's cap was there. This cabin exists. Someone needs to search it properly." Patterson sighed but agreed to send a team. They found the cabin exactly as Sarah and Michael had described, confirmed the cap was Tommy's, but discovered no other trace of the boy. The cabin, they determined, had been abandoned for at least 40 years. "But someone's been there recently," one of the deputies reported. "Fresh boot prints in the dust, adult-sized, and look at this." He held up a modern granola bar wrapper, the kind Sarah bought in bulk for Tommy's school lunches. With no other leads, Patterson suggested they speak to Agnes Hartley, the town historian who'd lived in Redwood Falls for all of her 91 years. Agnes lived in a Victorian house near the town square, surrounded by cats and filling cabinets that contained the unofficial history of every family in town. "The Harrison cabin," Agnes said immediately when they showed her the photograph. She adjusted her thick glasses and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. "Built in 1923 by Theodore Harrison. Now there's a name that doesn't get mentioned much anymore." "Why not?" Sarah asked. Agnes studied her shrewdly. "You're Sarah Mitchell, aren't you? Used to be Sarah Brennan before you married. Your mother was Patricia Brennan, and her mother was Dorothy Mills." "Yes, but what is that?" "Dorothy Mills," Agnes continued, flipping through pages, "was born Dorothy Harrison, Theodore's younger sister." Sarah felt the room tilt. "Theodore Harrison was my great-great-great-uncle?" Indeed. The Harrisons were one of the founding families of Redwood Falls, along with the Pattersons, the Millers, and the Brennans. Theodore was set to inherit everything: the lumber mill, the land holdings, the family fortune. Then, in 1952, he simply vanished. Left a note saying he was renouncing his claim and returning to the old ways, whatever that meant. The family was devastated, tried to hush it up. His brother Samuel took over the family businesses, and Theodore became persona non grata. The family moved away in the 60s, sold everything off. Agnes pulled out another box of documents, yellowed newspaper clippings and property deeds. But here's the interesting part. There were always stories about Theodore, even before he disappeared. Said he had an unusual way with animals, especially the wildcats. People claimed he could call them like dogs, that they'd eat from his hand. Nonsense, of course, but the stories persisted. Sarah thought of the Bobcat's deliberate taps, its patient guiding, and wondered if it was nonsense after all. "There's more," Agnes said, pulling out a hand-drawn family tree. The Harrisons didn't just marry into the founding families. There are records going back to the 1850s of marriages between Harrisons and members of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. Theodore's grandmother was Julia Pitt, a full-blooded member of the tribe. The connection to the land here goes deep, deeper than most realize. Michael leaned forward. "Agnes, do you think Theodore's disappearance and our sons, could they be connected?" Agnes was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that there are old secrets in these woods, and sometimes the past has a way of reaching into the present." They left Agnes's house with copies of everything she could find about Theodore Harrison and the cabin. That evening, as Sarah spread the documents across their kitchen table, trying to find some pattern, some clue, the Bobcat returned. This time, it didn't just tap. It paced the porch, agitated, and when Sarah opened the door, it actually vocalized. Not quite a meow, not quite a growl, but something urgent and demanding. "It wants us to follow again," Sarah said, already reaching for her jacket. "Now? It's getting dark." "Michael, it's been 4 days. If Tommy's out there, if there's any chance..." He was already pulling on his boots. This time, the Bobcat moved faster, leading them on a different route. They half-jogged to keep up, their flashlight beams dancing through the growing darkness. The path was treacherous, over fallen logs, through dense underbrush, across a wider creek that soaked them to the knees. After what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes, they emerged into another clearing, this one circular and oddly regular, as if deliberately maintained. In the center stood a ring of ancient cedars, their massive trunks forming a natural cathedral. The Bobcat led them between 2 of these giants and into the hidden space within. They found themselves in a glade that shouldn't exist, protected from wind, carpeted in soft moss, and somehow warmer than the surrounding forest. Their flashlights illuminated what looked like a camp. Several well-maintained tents, a fire pit with embers still glowing, supplies stacked neatly under a tarp. "Who's there?" a voice called out, and a figure emerged from the largest tent. It was a man, perhaps 60, with long gray hair tied back and wearing clothes that seemed a mixture of modern outdoor gear and traditional handmade items. His face was weathered but alert, and in the flashlight's beam, Sarah could see he had the same distinctive Harrison features she'd seen in the old photograph. "You're trespassing," the man said sternly. "This is sacred ground." "We're looking for our son," Michael said, stepping protectively in front of Sarah. "Tommy Mitchell, 7 years old. He's been missing for 4 days." The man's expression shifted. "Mitchell, you're Sarah Brennan Mitchell." It wasn't a question. "How do you know who I am?" "Because," the man said, "you're family. I'm David Harrison. Theodore was my grandfather." Sarah's mind reeled. "But Agnes said the Harrisons all left in the 60s. "The ones who wanted the modern life did," David replied. "But some of us understood what my grandfather discovered, that our connection to this land, to its creatures, wasn't something to abandon, but something to preserve. We've been here all along, just apart. Living in the forest, like some kind of cult?" Michael's voice was edged with suspicion and desperation. David smiled slightly. "Not a cult, a choice. A way of maintaining the old contracts." "Contracts?" "Between the first peoples and the land, between humans and animals. The Bobcats aren't pets, aren't trained. They're partners. They understand more than science admits, and we understand our obligation to protect them and their territory." "This is insane," Michael muttered, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Where is Tommy?" she demanded. "The Bobcat led us to the cabin. His cap was there." David studied them for a long moment, then called out something in a language Sarah didn't recognize. From another tent, a woman emerged. Younger, perhaps 35, with kind eyes and the same Harrison features. "This is my daughter, Rebecca," David said. "Tell them." Rebecca stepped forward. "4 days ago, I was checking our boundary trails when I found a boy. He was lost, crying, had fallen down a ravine and hurt his ankle. He was scared of me at first, but..." She smiled. "He said his mom had told him if he ever got lost, to find a safe adult and ask for help." Sarah let out a sob. Those had been her exact words. "I brought him here," Rebecca continued. "We've been trying to decide how to return him without revealing ourselves. Some of the family wanted to just leave him where the search teams would find him, but that seemed cruel. Others thought we should make anonymous contact with the authorities. We were still debating when Grandfather sent Sasha to you." "Sasha?" David gestured, and the Bobcat padded into view, sitting at his feet like a house cat. "She's been with our family for 8 years. Her mother was rescued by my grandfather as a kit. The bond passes through generations, theirs and ours." "Where is Tommy?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Please," Rebecca smiled. "Come." She led them to a smaller tent set apart from the others. Inside, illuminated by a battery-powered lantern, Tommy sat on a cot playing cards with a boy who looked about 10. His ankle was wrapped in a professional-looking bandage, and he was eating what appeared to be homemade stew. "Tommy!" Sarah cried, rushing to gather him in her arms. "Mom!" Tommy hugged her tight, then pulled back with 7-year-old excitement. "Mom, you won't believe it. They live here all the time, and they have bobcats for friends, and Marcus," he indicated the other boy, "is teaching me to track animals, and they know all the old stories. And did you know we're actually related to them? They're like our secret cousins." Michael wrapped them both in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "We thought we'd lost you, buddy." "I got lost," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "I was following a butterfly, and then I couldn't find my way back, and then I fell and hurt my foot, and then Rebecca found me. She's really nice. She's a doctor, not in a hospital, but she knows all about medicine from plants and regular medicine too." Sarah looked up at David and Rebecca, standing quietly at the tent entrance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for taking care of him." David nodded. Family takes care of family, even when they don't know their family. Over the next hour, as they prepared to take Tommy home, Sarah learned more about the hidden Harrison clan. There were 12 of them in total, living partially in the forest. Partially in regular society, Rebecca worked as an EMT in the next town over. David's son was a forest ranger. They moved between worlds, keeping the old ways alive while adapting to the new. "The bobcats," David explained, "they're indicators, like canaries in coal mines, but for the whole ecosystem. As long as they thrive, the forest is healthy. We monitor their populations, protect their hunting grounds, make sure development doesn't encroach too far. It's work that can't be done from inside civilization. It requires being part of the forest itself." "And you wanted us to know about you," Sarah said. "That's why you sent Sasha." "You had a right to know your heritage," David replied. "And Tommy, he has the sense. Did you notice? The butterfly he followed? It was leading him to us, though he didn't know it. Some of the Harrison line have always had the connection. It usually skips a generation or two. Sarah thought of her grandmother Dorothy, who'd always seemed to know when storms were coming, who could calm any animal, who died when Sarah was too young to ask the right questions. As they prepared to leave, David pulled Sarah aside. "The authorities will have questions. Tell them a hiker found Tommy and brought him to a ranger station, that you got an anonymous call. Keep our secret for now. But if you ever want to learn more, to understand your heritage..." He handed her a smooth stone with a hole worn through its center. "Leave this on the old cabin's doorstep. We'll know." The walk back was slow, with Michael carrying Tommy on his shoulders despite the boy's protests that his ankle felt much better. The Bobcat, Sasha, accompanied them to the edge of their property, then disappeared into the shadows with barely a rustle. The next morning brought chaos. Police interviews, medical checkups, reporters wanting the story of the miraculous return. Sarah and Michael stuck to David's suggested story, and Tommy, coached by his parents, talked mainly about his adventure in the forest without mentioning the hidden camp or the Harrison clan. Sheriff Patterson seemed suspicious but couldn't find any holes in their account. The medical examiner confirmed Tommy's ankle injury was properly treated. The anonymous hiker was never found, but in the relief of having Tommy back, few people pushed too hard for answers. 3 weeks later, after the media attention had died down and life had returned to something resembling normal, Sarah found herself standing at the window where Sasha had first appeared. The forest looked the same as always, deep, mysterious, holding its secrets close. Tommy was in the backyard, playing within sight as always now. But Sarah noticed him pause occasionally to watch the tree line with an intensity that reminded her of David Harrison's penetrating gaze. "He's different," Michael said, joining her at the window. "Since he came back." "Not different," Sarah corrected. "Awakened to something that was always there." She fingered the stone in her pocket, the one David had given her. She hadn't told Michael about it yet, wasn't sure she ever would. But sometimes, in the early morning when mist rose from the forest floor, she thought about walking to that old cabin, leaving the stone, learning what it meant to be a Harrison as well as a Brennan, a Mitchell. For now, though, it was enough to have her son home, to know that the forest that had taken him had also protected him, and that somewhere out there, family she'd never known existed was keeping watch. That evening, as they tucked Tommy into bed, he asked, "Mom, will we see them again? Rebecca and David and Sasha?" Sarah smoothed his hair, still amazed to be able to do such a simple thing. "Maybe someday, sweetie." "I hope so," Tommy said sleepily. "They're family, right? And family should know each other." Later, as Sarah and Michael sat on their porch in the warm evening air, a movement in the garden caught their eye. A bobcat, not Sasha, but another one, younger and smaller, sat at the edge of the lawn, watching them. "Friend of yours?" Michael asked with a small smile. "Friend of ours," Sarah corrected. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt truly at peace. The young bobcat lingered for another moment, then melted back into the forest. But Sarah knew now that it wasn't really goodbye. The forest, the bobcats, the hidden Harrisons, they were all part of a larger story, one that her family had been written into long before she was born. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the tree line, Sarah understood that sometimes being lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. Tommy's disappearance had been a nightmare, but it had also been a doorway to family, to heritage, to a connection with the land that ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. The search teams had found nothing in the forest, but the forest itself had found them, had judged them worthy of its trust, and had returned their son along with something more. A sense of belonging that stretched back generations and forward into a future where the wild and the civilized could still meet, still recognize each other, still protect what mattered most. The porch light attracted moths that danced in erratic circles, and somewhere in the darkness, a bobcat called, not the scream that sends shivers down hikers' spines, but something softer, almost like a greeting. Sarah smiled, knowing that greeting was meant for them, a reminder that family takes many forms, and home is more than just the house you live in. It's also the wild places that remember your name, even when you've forgotten theirs.